We will start with Nathan. He's engineering manager in the experience team, and he will talk about how to win a war against France. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Excellent. Good afternoon. Here we are, halfway through Tobii's excellent Develop Beyond conference. Hope you guys are enjoying yourself, and I hope you found something to inspire you. I'm Nathan. I'm engineering manager here at Tobii. If you've used head tracking or eye tracking on a Windows PC, chances are you've used something my team makes. This is not going to be a technical talk. This is going to be a story about history, or at least I'm going to start with a story about history. Then we'll get on to some practical stuff. You should know that this isn't going to be 40 minutes of me pointing at maps, but if you hate the idea of someone pointing at maps they made, the next 10 minutes are going to be rough. Fantastic. I'm going to talk today about the Franco-Prussian War, a war between France and Germany that happened in 1870, 152 years ago, long before eye tracking and even before C++. Even so, even though it was that long ago, I think there's a lot to learn from it today, specifically about how we organize ourselves as a tech company. So if you're interested in process and how to do leadership, stick around. For me to tell you this story, here's the pointing at maps. For me to tell you this story, you need to understand a few things about how Europe was in 1870. Germany was not a country yet. It was a collection of independent states. France was ruled by an emperor, Napoleon III. Germany had recently come to be dominated by the largest and strongest power there, Prussia. Napoleon was terrified of Prussia's growing power and was looking for an opportunity to put Prussia in its place. France wanted war. Prussia wanted war as well. The Prussian goal was a united Germany. But unfortunately for the Prussians, the independent states of Germany were not too keen to give up on their independence. However, if France attacked, everything would be different, and unification would be possible. So, in 1870, after a disagreement over, frankly, some nonsense and a bit of name-calling, France declared war on Prussia and on her German allies. Going into this war, France had a lot of advantages. France had been the dominant power in Western Europe for centuries. 50 years earlier, she'd lost the Napoleonic Wars, but only after going to war with almost all of Europe and conquering most of it. The graphics are good. France was strong. France had an experienced and a professional army, battle-hardened in North Africa. France also had the superior rifle. This was important. Rifle technology was advancing very quickly at the time. In the 19th century, the difference having a technologically superior rifle could make was a difference that could win wars and bring down empires. That bottom rifle is the French one, and it makes the top one obsolete. It might not be so clear from the pictures. They both kind of look like old-timey brown guns. But you're going to have to believe me. I'm afraid the props budget wasn't quite enough to bring in two of these for you today. They are legal in Sweden, though. They are old enough. Ask me about that later. The French also had a secret machine gun project, a top secret project that they expected to be a game changer. The Prussians, of course, had advantages as well. While the French had been investing in the latest rifles, the Prussians had been investing in artillery. That there on the left is a Krupp gun, and it is a really, really good cannon. The Prussians didn't have as a professional army as the French did, but So that meant they needed to mobilize it. When war happened, they needed to take time to gather people out of their civilian lives, put them in uniform, and push them to the front. But the Germans were really good at this. They used railways really well to achieve it. Their choice to go for a less professional army also meant they could have a slightly bigger army than the French. Very happy with that one as well. All in all, though, things were still looking pretty good for the French. They were confident in their rifle, and they were confident in their battle-hardened troops. They were confident that they could win against Prussia and put it in its place. So, on July 19th, 1870, the war began. The French were split into 3 armies. Far to the west, 6 Corps, guarded against a possible German invasion through Belgium. The second of these armies, 1st Corps, guarded the border in the east with Germany in Alsace. The third and largest of these armies, the Army of the Rhine, was led by the Emperor himself and was at the fortress town of Metz. The Germans were also split into 3 armies, but with a slightly saner naming scheme. 1st Army, 2nd Army, and 3rd Army. I kind of feel a bit like a weatherman when I'm doing this, but let's proceed. A French invasion of Germany was expected. And surely enough, on August 2nd, the French attacked the German town of Saarbrücken. They beat the Germans there and took the town, but just as soon as they had arrived, they left. They retreated back into France. The French invasion of Germany had made it 10 kilometers, but now they had decided it was a better tactic to wait and defend. It would be the Germans' turn next. 2 days later, on August 4th, the German armies crossed the border into France. The 1st and 2nd Army pushed towards Metz, while the 3rd Army fought its way into Alsace. Their goal was to encircle the French Army of the Rhine at Metz and to destroy it. The Germans won a string of battles and moved into eastern France. By August 15th, less than 2 weeks after crossing the border, their encirclement of the French was almost complete. Finally becoming awake to this danger, the French Army of the Rhine left Metz, trying to escape to the west. Last map, I promise. On the morning of August 16th, the next day, near a village called Mars-le-Tour, 3 Corps, a small part of the German 2nd Army, bumped into the escaping French. The German 2nd Army had been given just one order: stop the French from escaping Metz until the trap could be closed. 3 Corps' commander had no idea that he just bumped into the entire French force, but he realized that if 2nd Army was going to achieve its objective, he had to do something to slow down the French, and he had to do it immediately. So he attacked. 3 Corps was outnumbered, and it was a tough fight for the Germans. At one point during the battle, with German morale dropping fast under relentless French cannon fire, 3 Corps' commander resorted to a desperate course of action. He ordered a cavalry charge straight at the French cannons. His cavalry commander, noting dryly that the charge would cost what it cost, headed off with his men into what would become known as the Death Ride. The Death Ride was expensive for the Germans. It was costly. The clue is in the name. But it did work. In fact, it was the last cavalry charge ever in Western Europe to be successful. The Germans had managed to hang on. Nearby German units, hearing the sounds of battle in the distance, moved autonomously to join in. By the late afternoon, the German 9 and 10 Corps had joined in, relieving an exhausted and damaged 3 Corps. Nearby French units didn't join in, instead choosing to wait for orders. History records the outcome of this battle as a draw. Three Corps commander had taken a gamble. He had fought a battle that he could not win. But his judgment was sound. He had slowed down the French escape for long enough for the rest of Second Army to close the road west. 2 days later, the French, and this time a larger German force, fought again on the same ground. This time the Germans won. They were finally able to close the trap on the French at Metz. So the Army of the Rhine was trapped in the German pincer now and in trouble. The other two German armies I mentioned tried to rescue the Army of the Rhine, who was stuck at Metz. But at a place called Sedan, they were destroyed, and the Emperor Napoleon III was captured. Encircled and with no help coming, the Army of the Rhine would eventually surrender in October. This was not a great start for the war for France. The war wasn't over. It would continue through the winter into 1871, but all hope for French victory had been extinguished. The government that had started the war in France, with the capture of the emperor at Sedan, no longer existed. The only thing to be fought about was how large the French defeat would be. In January, the Prussian dreams came true. The King of Prussia was named German Emperor at the French Palace of Versailles, and Germany was united. The French would surrender shortly after, agreeing to pay financial reparations and to lose territory. So, what went wrong? It seemed so good. How it had gone from a good situation into something so terrible for the French. The French would think about this question long and hard after the war was done. They copied the Germans' better use of artillery and of railways and of mobilization, but that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about another lesson they learned, one that is still relevant 152 years later. The French had suffered from a critical organizational weakness, one that had let the Germans win when they shouldn't have. The Germans had been aggressive, autonomous, flexible, and had taken opportunities when they saw them. The French had been inflexible, passive, and had let those opportunities slip by. French post-war thought went as follows. They had been overcome by a more aggressive enemy. It had been a mistake to rely on the destructive action of weapons and technology, and instead they had been beaten by the moral action of motivated troops. The Germans, they felt the Germans had been motivated by one single idea: hit hard, and then they had given the French a beating. A new, more aggressive French doctrine would be built upon this foundation: attack to the excess. So, what the hell has this got to do with business in 2022? Well, I don't think we should attack to the excess, and I certainly don't think we should pick fights with Germans. But we do have process, and we do have culture, and these things are important. So here is my moral. Here is what I get if I apply the French learnings to our context. It's up to leadership to set good values and processes that enable teams and individuals to approach their work correctly. Management should design good work organization and delegation structures so that we can be an organization that takes opportunities instead of one that lets them slip by. We need to manage cross-team workflows and dependencies so that, unlike the French, our teams will always be there to help each other. And that's my moral. It's very tidy, and I think it's rather appealing. But since we have time, let's check how it worked out for the French. they'd learned their lessons, and they'd changed their way of doing things. So let's see what successes they enjoyed. The next war between France and Germany would be the First World War. For those of you who don't know, the First World War was a brief conflict between July 1914 and December 1914. Famously, the superior French enthusiasm overcame the Germans just in time for everyone to make it home by Christmas. Which is obviously not what happened. The First World War was 4 years of terrible slaughter. Here's the thing about the Franco-Prussian War. It gave military thinkers all over Europe some really, really terrible ideas. I mentioned the machine gun project. It'd been top secret, but it turns out it'd been so secret that when it came time to use it, the French didn't know how, or they didn't know how to use it well. I mentioned the death ride at the Battle of Mars-la-Tours that helped the Germans hang on. It had been the last successful cavalry charge in Western Europe. The thing is, the military thinkers didn't know it would be the last one. All they saw was horses succeed and machine guns fail, and they came to some questionable conclusions about which belonged on the modern battlefield. France, though, entered World War I with its own special set of terrible ideas. This is not the French in 1870. This is them in 1914. They entered the war, I'm going to use the laser pointer now, they entered the war wearing lovely bright red trousers and very charming matching hats, expecting to win the war through a glorious bayonet charge. This, after all, was attack to the excess. This was the aggression that they built into their doctrine after 1870. And now, it was up against that. Trenches, barbed wire, modern machine guns. A belief in the magical power of enthusiasm does not survive well in this environment. It did not go well for the French. The problem was, when the French had been analyzing the Franco-Prussian War, they'd missed something. They'd missed something important. And the business advice I gave you those slides back, while not terrible, is also missing the exact same thing. Not yet. The French were thinking inside of a box containing two ideas. Success is about defining the right process. With enough thought, we can arrive at a model of doing things that solves all of our problems. Leadership is about the delegation of work. A good leader creates a plan and then divides and distributes the work involved in achieving that plan. So when they saw German success on the battlefield in 1870, they assumed they were looking at better process and better delegation of work. But they were wrong. That's not what was happening. The German philosophy of war existed outside of this box. This document is Prussian Field Marshal Helmuth von Moltke's 1869 Instructions for Large Unit Commanders. And it is the foundation of the German approach. It was the foundation of the German approach. It contains one core principle. Commanders need to emphasize the purpose of their orders rather than the method of execution. 4 principles follow from this. Subordinates should have maximum freedom in execution. Subordinates will always have a more timely and more complete understanding of the battlefield. Subordinates should disobey a direct order if they feel the situation had changed. Subordinates should seize opportunities rather than waiting for orders. I can see a lot of nods here. This doesn't sound crazy to us. But in 1869, saying it was a soldier's job to disobey orders was pretty crazy. In fact, all of this is radical. what it meant to be a great leader back then, a great general like Napoleon or Frederick the Great, was to be someone who came up with a genius plan, something complex, something big-brained, and then carefully organized their soldiers to execute it. Moltke hadn't done this. Instead, he had made sure that his subordinates were capable people and then trusted them to do the job. It is completely boring by comparison. Excuse me. Do you remember when I talked about the German Third Corps, 3 Corps, the small German unit that started the Battle of Mars-la-Tour? Well, they started that battle on their initiative because they realized the French were escaping. And then more German units joined on their initiative. More French units did not join. They waited. The Germans didn't have a better fighting process and weren't better at organizing their men. The difference was every commander understood the mission and had both the freedom and the responsibility to do what they thought was best to achieve that mission. I'm going to offer now what I think is a slightly improved business model from my original one. Leadership is about building alignment and autonomy. Autonomy is the freedom for independent action. Alignment is the understanding of the bigger picture. It's what's required to make sure that independent action helps to fulfill a bigger goal. Of course, nowadays, it's easier to get a lot more information a lot quicker as a leader than it was in 1870. We have Slack, we have email. But there is a fundamental principle that has not changed. The people closest to the work still have the best understanding of the problems they face. Great leaders communicate a vision and a bigger picture. They train their people to make sure they can make good decisions. And then they trust them to do so. This applies to both people management and product management. But let's talk about the second. Let's talk about product management. What does a software development team following the 1869 instructions look like? Let me tell you 3 things about that kind of team. The team should be cohesive and loosely coupled. Cohesive, they should be cohesive, they should work together closely. They should be loosely coupled. They should be able to act independently of other teams without negotiating, without seeking permission, and definitely without breaking things for other teams. The team should own their product. They should be in some kind of value area. They should understand their product. And they should be in direct contact with their real customers. They have final say on their products, what features to build, everything. The team should be making responsible decisions. The team does include the PO. Decisions should not be passed on from above. The vision can be passed on from above, but product decisions should not be. Teams should own their own process. What do I mean by process, quickly? I do not mean a box labeled development or implementation. I mean the whole value chain from idea to happy customer. A team can responsibly decide how they best serve their stakeholders. Whether they use Scrum, Kanban, estimation, how they deliver, it's up to a team to make responsible decisions. There is a mix of both freedom and responsibility here. In many traditional organizations, it can be hard for product management to give up the control necessary to make this work. But it can also be hard for Teams, because teams have to step up and take responsibility. For instance, understanding your product enough to own it properly is hard. We've been lucky enough to have a session across the way about understanding the gaming product, and that's really good. But the team I'm describing here, they understand what their most valuable features are, and they have a plan to validate the feature they're working on now, and the team is engaged with that plan. A team doesn't become loosely coupled by magic either. It takes skill, effort, and good architecture to break dependencies with other teams and to create good boundaries. And then once we are loosely coupled, we have to keep talking, so we continue to share our ideas and our culture. Here's another thing that's hard as well. A team working like this is probably, and I say probably, using continuous integration, continuous delivery, and potentially continuous deployment. There are a lot of reasons why a team would work that way, but the one that's relevant here is it's a good way to build trust with stakeholders. Those stakeholders have to give up a lot of direct control for this autonomy thing to work. And I find a good way to make them less nervous about that transaction is to ship often. It's hard stuff. It's just nothing but a collection of hard stuff. I think we're doing a good job here at Tobii. I think obviously we still have opportunities to improve. Your experience will vary. Tobii is a big place, but I just want to sort of share a good thing and a bad thing from my small corner of Tobii. A good thing is that we have a well-designed team structure so we can properly own areas of value. I will add a second good thing, which is that a lot of effort goes into understanding the products. As I mentioned, the talk over there is a good example of that. And now a bad thing. We make a lot of our product decisions above the level of the team. I don't think that's for the best. But I will say this. Here at Tobii, we are a company of smart people who trust each other. We trust each other to try new things, and we trust each other to do things a little bit differently. I believe if anyone can succeed at this, it's us. Thank you.